How are you today? I hear you're actually in beautiful Washington today.
I am in beautiful Washington.
Well, actually, it was such a lovely day that the president took advantage of the weather and went out in the Rose Garden and had another news conference, and he stunned the world by announcing that he is going to keep at it in Iraq, and he is not going to give up and leave. So there were all these questions.
Right.
From
dogs keep fighting men worldwide, and the president keeps announcing that we're not going to leave and give up in Iraq.
There were all these reporters, questions from reporters, and it was all kind of the same question.
Mm-hmm.
Can't you see this is a disaster, and you've got to go, and why do you still believe you could do this? So he stood firm on that. But the thing that does kind of interest me more than Bush about this Iraq debate going on right now is the position of the Democrats and why they have seemed to have backed off this deadline stuff, and I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
You know, I actually think that the mystery of why Bush keeps sticking to it and the mystery of why the Democrats are backing off of it, it's the same answer. They're both sort of gutless and missing an opportunity. It's funny, actually. I mean, have the Democrats being kind of gutless on this is not particularly surprising. But here's what I can't understand about this. It seems to me like the Democratic legislation, which Bush vetoed, calling for a redeployment with a goal of combat troop withdrawal, next October or whatever, October '08, and still leaving troops for counterterrorism and U.S. personnel protection and so forth. I didn't understand with that why the Democrats didn't say. Why the president, first of all, didn't declare victory, didn't say, this is a great bill, this is actually what I've been saying for years. I've been saying for years, of course we're not going to leave our troops there forever. I've also been saying, of course we're not going to have an absolutely rigid deadline. I've also been saying it's time for the Iraqi government to step up and take responsibility. We want to see some rapid progress made. And thank you, Democratic Congress, for passing this bill, which lays out very clearly precisely what I have been saying we need to do over the years. And thank you for having a target withdrawal of more than a year from now, which, of course, I share that goal. Thank you for not making it rigid so that we're not tying anybody's hands. Thank you for validating my strategy of moving forward with various kinds of goals of getting the Iraqi government to take responsibility. And thank you for recognizing that in the long run, no matter what goals we set for combat troop redeployment, we're going to need to keep some troops there. It seems to me that that was a face-saving opportunity he missed, and similarly for the Democrats, in the face of his resistance, they had an opportunity to say, we don't understand why the president is vetoing this bill, which simply gives him precisely what he's been saying he wants for years.
Actually,
it's just bizarre.
I see this a little differently. I mean, I see Bush's position, Bush taking his position basically because he believes it's the right thing to do. Now, he may be wrong, but I think he believes it's the right thing to do. With the Democrats, I think that they believe that the right thing to do would be to get out as fast as possible. So it seems to me that and it just kind of mystifies me because, look, there were two messages from the election in November, and one was that Republicans were fat and happy and corrupt and they needed, a change in Washington, but the other was the war, and the message was, from people who elected Democrats at least, get out. And I don't understand why Democrats are not being more
But here's what I actually think that the message from the electorate was slightly more nuanced than that, and I think the Democrats rightly do recognize that at least. The message was not just get the hell out, slam the door tomorrow. The message was, boy, what a mess. We don't like seeing a completely open-ended commitment of U.S. troops, U.S. money, U.S. bodies and blood, Iraqi civilians' bodies and blood. We need to figure out a way to start winding down, and we need to come up with some actual measure that we can use to say, is what we're doing working, and when it's not, when do we start turning around? That's why I actually read the bill that got vetoed pretty carefully, and what in some ways subjected it to some criticism from the left was that actually far from micromanaging anybody, it was pretty wishy-washy. The language in that bill was stuff that the president should have been able to live with ease, because every single thing that purported to say president's got to do this also included waiver provisions saying, except if you think it's not in our national security. Every single date and so forth had, was framed in the language of this is a goal. The odd thing is, I accept what you say, that Bush thinks it's the right thing to do to stay, but why is that at all inconsistent with saying, sure, but it's not open-ended, and surely we need to talk about how we know that we're succeeding. What are the things that we need to see to know that we're succeeding, versus what are the things that we need to see that would tell us this is just never going to work, might as well get out. That I don't understand why he doesn't welcome that process. Yeah, why is that a defeat?
No, I see your point. And Bush himself has talked about benchmarks a lot. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, I caused a little disagreement in some quarters of the blogosphere. I guess a few weeks ago, I wrote an entry in our group blog on National Review called The Corner. I said, well, what's so bad about deadlines? It seems to me that the argument is always, of course, that the deadline says to the enemy, here's the date, just wait us out, and you can have the whole country. But it seems clear that the Iraqi government needs some sort of deadline to me, because the only times there have been real forward progress in Iraq, in electing a parliament and writing a constitution, etc., has been when there was a deadline, and then the deadline got pushed a little bit, and then, under great pressure, they actually do it. Mm-hmm. I actually had a chance to ask Bush this in an Oval Office interview right before the election, and, the question was, don't they need something to just kick them in the ass?
Right.
And, and he said, well, that's what we're talking about with benchmarks. But he felt you could push so hard that you could topple the Maliki government, and, all hell would break loose. But, I have to agree. I think that a deadline would be work as well on the Iraqi government as it would on the enemy.
And I think in terms of the concern that the enemy just says, oh, good, if we can only hunker down until, October 08, then we can just take over. Precisely the fact that it's not a rigid deadline. In the original bill, it was not a rigid deadline. It was formulated as a goal. And it laid out pretty clearly some of the things that would lead to that goal actually slipping. And it left in a very, very open-ended precisely how many troops would remain for counterterrorism purposes, et cetera, training purposes. So it's hard to see the enemy looking at that and seeing it as anything other than, frankly, I think it was, which was in some sense a cop-out to begin with on the part of the Democrats, at least vis-a-vis those in the electorate who wanted immediate withdrawal.
Yeah, well, I think Democrats felt a little burned when this whole subject of the surge was first coming up. And John Murtha gives this interview to an internet, a web group. I can't remember what it was. It was like movecongress.org.
Right.
It was not moveon.org. It was something like that. Tom Andrews, the former member of Congress. And, Murtha goes through all these things he wants to put in bills for troop readiness and resting time at home and all of this stuff. And it was clear that the reason he was doing it was he wanted to kill the surge. And he said flat out, we're going to kill this surge.
Right.
And I think they felt they looked bad when they did that, and they kind of showed their hand. And so, on the other hand, it seems to me that what we've seen, at least up until now, since the election, has been Democrats tiptoeing a little further each time in the direction of deadlines, because right after the election they said, oh, we would never cut off funding, we're not going to do anything like that, and then they start moving in that direction. So the question for me now is,
they were not going to cut off funding.
So why did they stop? Anyway,
that bill did not cut off funding. I mean, I think that's a mythology about the bill. There was so much wiggle room; it was just never going to end up cutting off funding. And they knew it. Everybody knew it. It was theater.
It was something closer than what they were pledging immediately after the election, which was never.
I think it was total theater, and it was theater that bit them. I mean, they persuaded people a little too much. That they were playing to the sort of hardcore withdraw now crowd. They didn't actually intend to cut off funding because they were too wimpy, but they wanted to sort of sound like maybe they would, even when in reality the language of the legislation really was not going to do any such thing because there were so many waiver provisions. And then, of course, they got freaked out when the media started reacting and the Republicans started reacting like, hey, you're threatening to cut off the funding. And they backed off. And they backed off something that wasn't much of a stand in the first place. You know, and I do. I mean, I really am mad at them at this point. I'm mad at the Democratic leadership in Congress because I just think it's craven. I don't think an immediate withdrawal would be a good idea. I don't think a hard funding cutoff would be a good idea. I think that benchmarks and a goal of a withdrawal date and some effort to really flesh out, well, what do we need to see here and under what circumstances does staying or leaving make sense, is a great idea. That's all they were doing, but because they couldn't be straightforward about it, and they couldn't be straightforward and defend what they were actually doing, so they're ending up just ducking and running all over the place.
Well, they are. Now, you talk about how wimpy they were. Do you think there's any possibility that any of them believe that the surge will make any progress?
I don't know. I think that early on, probably lots of people, myself included, I felt like, it seems unlikely that it will succeed. It seems so unlikely that we think it's a bad idea to try it, but that said, since it's happening anyway, let's wait and see, and maybe it will work. I think that the news since then has really been only discouraging. So at this point, I think that people are just feeling more and more despairing. I mean, it's not a good situation, obviously, and I get frustrated by the rhetoric of it's their civil war, it's their problem, because I think that that's not the right lens. It's not just their problem, it's our problem too. We create it. We do have a responsibility to do something about it. But I get equally frustrated with the rhetoric on the right that says, hey, it's our responsibility, we've got to see it through, because it's so divorced from any willingness to talk about what we actually can do. At some point you say, yes, we have a responsibility. We do not seem able, we lack the capacity to do what we wish we could do and what we ought to be doing. And when that's the situation, you don't keep throwing bodies and money when you can't do anything,
Well, in any event, both sides seem to have decided to stand down until September. So we'll see about that. Now, the next topic we want to talk about is immigration. And there is enormous anger on the right, maybe not anger, a lot of disapproval on the right for this compromise immigration bill that the Senate is working on, and actually seem to think that they could, get it done, in a couple of days, that they, announce their deal over the weekend and come, Monday, Tuesday, have it all wrapped up. And I think they've gotten such bad reaction from the right, although there are certainly reservations about it on the left, that now it's going to take a long time. And the question, in my mind right now, is this thing even going to happen? People are telling me that they really do believe there are 60 votes in the Senate for this bill. On the other hand, a lot of conservatives hope that they can do something along the lines of the Harriet Miers crusade, where they just slam dunked Bush and got him to back off. So I'm kind of thinking that since we do have a Memorial Day break coming up, since talk radio has really pedaled to the metal on this, that we might actually see this thing die or be changed very substantially.
I think you're right, and I think it would be kind of a shame. I haven't. This is not a piece of legislation I've read really carefully. My sense from what I've read about it is that it's not perfect for anybody. But I think we've been at such an impasse on the issue that we're at a point where some imperfect legislation probably is better than the current situation. You can always fiddle with it later, but if we don't manage to kind of just get someone off the political will to do something, everybody's actually going to be worse off. I don't know. I mean, your guess is better than mine for what is actually what the inside lobbying is going to be like. But what is quite clear is that it's enough of a compromise that not only do people on the right hate it because it looks too much to them, like amnesty, but people on the left hate it as well because they're concerned about the family reunification.
Is that the big thing to
provision.
change from families to skills? Is that the biggest objection?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is, and I think that people are concerned about some of the unintended consequences. As I said, I haven't read it carefully. My gut feeling is let's just get something down and then let's make fixes to it as needed later on when you've got the kind of the basic framework.
Yeah, well, see, I don't have that opinion. The president today at the news conference said, we can't go at this piecemeal. And I thought, why not? Sure we could. And, if you ask them that, they say, well, that, reform has to be comprehensive. And you say, why? And they say, well, because it does. So a lot of Republicans are in the frame of mind of, we just got to do this because we got to do it. And the biggest objections that I sense are a little more nuanced than just amnesty. That illegal immigrants would be granted sort of probationary legal status. The whole idea of a 24-hour background check, 24-hour limit on background checks strikes me as just nuts. I mean, it's just absolutely guaranteed to fail. The biggest objection, though, on the right about this, the fundamental objection is they don't believe that the government's really going to do this stuff, the enforcement stuff, because they didn't in 1986. And if you talk to people who object to the bill, and you say, look, okay, it does require waiting all this time and checking up and getting background checks and paying money and stuff like this. I mean, if in a perfect world you could be absolutely assured that the government would actually do this stuff, would you then be able to accept the bill? And they said, yeah, probably so. So the fundamental catching point is that people, and I think correctly, do not trust the government to do this, in part because they know Bush doesn't want to do it, the enforcement stuff. A lot of members of the Senate don't want to do it. And
a lot of employers don't want to do it.
Employers don't want to do it, so it's just not going to get done. So they feel that all of the liberal side of it, the granting of path to citizenship and all that is going to happen, while the enforcement side isn't going to happen. And
they may very well be right about that. But quite frankly, I'm not that sympathetic. My view on some level is, look, if absolutely no one has the will to do that, then maybe we shouldn't be doing it. That at some point you say, the business community doesn't really want this. The immigrants don't want this. The left doesn't want this. Congress doesn't want this. The president doesn't want you to do it. Maybe that's a pretty good sign that really trying to crack down on people already here, et cetera, is just not going to work.
But we'll have to see. Like I said, the insiders in the Capitol tell me that they think this thing can certainly pass the Senate. But I don't know. I mean, we could be looking at a Hillary Care or a Harriet Miers or something. When people get out into their districts and states, they just find there's so much opposition to it. So, now the next topic is Monica Goodling, the new Monica.
The new Monica.
New Monica.
Every generation must have its Monica. Every administration needs a Monica.
Monica, 21st century Monica. Anyway, Monica Goodling, the former top official at the Justice Department, finally testified before the House Judiciary Committee on Wednesday. And she did it after, saying that she was going to take the Fifth. And they had a lot of negotiations, and the Judiciary Committee agreed to grant her use immunity so that they would not use anything that she testified to against her in a criminal sense. And so I went to the hearing, and they had to, they have this little play they have to do where they all talk to each other for a while, and then Monica sits down in the chair and is sworn in, and then John Conyers, the chairman, asks her a question, and she refuses to answer it on grounds of Fifth Amendment, and they say, well, we happen to have this notarized piece of paper we're going to hand you, giving you immunity, and they walk it over to her, and everybody looks at it, and then she starts to talk. So that's what happened. And she said a couple of things that added a little bit to our knowledge of the U.S. Attorney's matter, but not a whole lot. One was that she said she had done wrong and that she stepped over the line by using political criteria to evaluate.
But she meant well. She meant well.
She did mean well.
whatever well means in this
to
context.
evaluate some career job prospects.
Right.
And the other thing that was somewhat damaging was that she described a meeting in March as she's about to leave the Justice Department. She goes to see Alberto Gonzales, just the two of them in the room, and Gonzales begins to tell her his version, what he remembers about the firing of the U.S. attorneys, and she testifies, excuse me, that she's feeling a little apprehensive about this. She's uncomfortable.
She senses a plot.
Because she...
or a trap.
She won't come out and say it.
Right.
But clearly the deal is that
Right.
She's worried that, Gonzales is saying we got to get our stories straight,
Right.
because we're going to be asked
Right.
about this a lot.
AKA tampering with a witness, obstructing justice. She's thinking deep in the back of her mind, but she's not going to say that.
And the other thing, the last thing, there were three things actually, was she said that the testimony of the former Deputy Attorney General Paul McNulty was incomplete and inaccurate. But she said it was not her fault, that she had fully briefed him on this stuff, and it was interesting in her testimony, in her prepared testimony, she only referred to McNulty as the deputy. She never said his name. She kept saying, the deputy told me this, I told the deputy that, the deputy came here, so that all the talk about this deputy, and he never heard his actual name for a while. It seems to me that there was a lot of hope in the sort of Firedog Lake quarters of the left, that she would have, she would kind of blow things wide open. And we really didn't learn a whole lot more than we'd known before.
No, I think that's right. She confirmed everybody's suspicions, though. And it was just a final piece of the jigsaw puzzle that everybody already knew what the picture was going to look like.
Well, but see, I think, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I mean, her picture of the firings. I mean, she also said, "Look, I'm just a little guy, and I didn't know why these U.S. attorneys were fired," which is kind of what Gonzales said, except he didn't say he was a little guy, but he said
I'm just a big guy. I didn't know they were being fired.
He didn't know why they were fired, and he said, subsequently I went back and I learned that this person was deficient on immigration law, or this person was deficient on guns, or whatever. So I think what's happening is the people who really want to pursue this a lot are moving further in the further direction of, we've got to get Rove on the stand. If we don't have Rove, we'll never find out what happened. And they cannot, I think, conceive of the possibility that this might have been an enormous screw-up. And by screw-up, I mean, I think what happened was, the president gets reelected. 2005, the new term, they think they want to clean out some places. They want to replace some U.S. attorneys. In part, they want to give political experience to some of their people, like Tim Griffin, who became U.S. attorney in Arkansas. And they decide, they're going to do this. And then they just start sitting around and talking about it, and then nothing gets done. And months pass, and then they think about this, and months more pass, and they kind of forgot what they were doing in the first place. And a few more months pass because some of the U.S. attorneys' 4-year terms hadn't expired. And, at the end of the process, it was so disorganized, chaotic, piecemeal, pointless, that some people were fired and some people weren't, and they didn't have a good explanation. Now, the counter-explanation, of course, is that they had corrupt motives for this a very small number of U.S. attorneys, and they wanted to stop investigations, and they nailed them. But I don't think anything we've seen up till now really supports the planned
we certainly don't have any solid evidence that they're sitting there and saying, we got to get rid of this guy because he's going to investigate Republicans or anything like that. No, that said, I think your explanation is probably a mix of the two, but not in any way that we're ever going to be able to prove, and it really shouldn't matter because he should just get out of there. This is another one of those stories. It's exactly like the other Monica story, right, where the deepest problem is not the underlying behavior itself, but just the sort of, falling all over yourself to say, what? Do what? I didn't do that. Do what? And contradicting yourself and blaming each other and making a big mess. I mean, that's the real problem, is that, just as much as Clinton sort of fell on his own sword over Monica Lewinsky by contradicting himself and, parsing his terms a little too carefully and trying to cover up something that he should just have come clean about, we've got the same thing going on now, and that's the problem, is that they're now paralyzing large sections of the administration by being such idiots. You know, they could and they ought to just jettison Alberto Gonzales at this point. And there they've got Comey, a great replacement candidate. Both sides of the aisle would love him.
Well, you know, the interesting thing, the difference, of course, with the Clinton scandal was this is the Attorney General we're talking about, not the President himself.
Same phenomenon, though. Same phenomenon. I mean, same phenomenon of a high official who's got a very clear duty not to be lying and not to be covering things up, who starts doing precisely that.
Or even if he's not lying, if he's just, you know, so out of touch and so not in control. You are so not in control.
Well, and going back and forth between acting as if he was in control and insisting that he wasn't in control and changing his mind and, you know, whatever picture you want to paint, whether the picture is of an attorney general who is, you know, vindictively pursuing a corrupt political agenda, or whether you want to have a picture of an attorney general who, you know, who's just letting 33-year-olds run amok in the Justice Department doing whatever the hell they want to for bad reasons, including some things that arguably are illegal, and he didn't know anything about it because he didn't care, because he was just happy to delegate to these very junior people. You know, that's not great either.
No, it's not. And listen, I thought that Gonzales would be gone by now. I certainly did, and I've been surprised at Bush's keeping him in, you know, because, you know, at some point, you know, Bush was standing by Rumsfeld, you know, until the very last minute, and then once the election had, you know, 24 hours didn't pass before he got rid of him. So I guess there hasn't been that one catalyzing moment with Gonzales. I do think...
I never quite understood exactly what the catalyzing moment was for Rumsfeld's ouster either. I mean, what actually
he lost the
changed?
election. He lost the election. I mean,
he lost the election, but right after the election, he's still saying, "I love the guy. I've got total confidence." And then suddenly he goes, "Oh, never mind."
No. He canned Rumsfeld the next morning. Bush
the
had
next
a news
morning,
conference.
Is that right? Gosh.
Yeah, Bush had we got a thumping news conference. Was Wednesday after Tuesday election day, and they announced Rumsfeld's leaving. And so, you know, and a lot of Republicans were just livid with him because they felt Rumsfeld had been a drag on the various tickets around the country a lot. And they
might
said,
have helped if you'd done that a little bit earlier.
If you were going to do this, why didn't you do it several weeks ago when it might have done
I mean, this gets back to the broader mysteriousness of what the Bush administration actually thinks it's doing in the remaining time President Bush is in office. This goes back to the question about, you know, my question about why didn't Bush respond to the Iraq bill that he vetoed, instead by claiming victory, by saying, yeah, I've been telling you people all along that we're not there forever, et cetera, that we want to have goals, we want to have benchmarks. You know, instead of letting it look like a bitter fight, which is actually at this point I think hurting both sides. You know, he could have just claimed victory. Well, you know, on Gonzales, you know, he's doing things that are just paralyzing his own administration, making it very, very hard to see how he can actually get anything useful done. Why not just say, you know what, folks, fresh start, move on?
Yeah. Well, I don't buy your theory about how Bush could have made the deadlines bill, you know, work for him. But I do think
that's just not thinking creatively enough.
I guess you're right. I'm not. But you know, the Gonzales thing is a mystery because I don't think it would hurt him with anyone to get rid of Gonzales, and I think it would be the right thing to do. And now, you know, he's doing immigration. So what was it? Mickey Kaus said, you know, Karl Rove has located the last remnant of the Republican base and has destroyed it with laser-like efficiency. So no, look, I don't know exactly what he's doing. I do think on Iraq.
Is there anybody left? Is there anybody left on the right, Byron, who still believes in the Rove as evil genius theory or Rove as brilliant genius theory?
Well, I mean, the elections speak for themselves. I mean, Rove did a marvelous job in 2000, 2002, and 2004. So, I mean, the headwind in 2006 was huge. So I don't think you can deny Rove's accomplishments, whether he's, you know, lost a touch, lost a step, or whether he, you know, he kind of was out of it.
Do you think his basic electoral strategy was sound? It's just that everybody else in the administration made such a hash of the policy that even Rove couldn't sell it electorally anymore?
I think, look, the war in Iraq is what it is.
Yeah.
And I think if there was anything that Rove's influence was unintentionally negative, is that they became convinced that they had such a fabulous, super-duper election turnout machine that it could win elections, and as opposed to being in the right place on a number of important issues. So even leading up to November 2006, I think there were some people who felt that their turnout would just get them over the top, which it didn't, and which it won't in 2008 if if things are still this bad. But I think I think the left has always had this kind of everything is being directed behind the scenes by Rove, the Joe Wilson frog marching out of the White House fantasy. But I think that's overblown. In the U.S. attorneys thing, there were some U.S. attorneys who were not doing that great a job, some who were not well liked, one that Pete Domenici wanted to get rid of, some that other members of Congress were unhappy. I mean, there were kind of reasons for each of them, and I don't think it can be traced to any sort of Rovian plot. I just don't think it works. Now,
no, I mean my general feeling about life is that there are very, very rarely conspiracies. There are much more often, a bunch of disorganized people doing contradictory things, some of which are creepy, some of which are not, and it's often very hard to sort out which is which. But I do want to know what is the administration doing? I mean, what do they think they're going to accomplish? Who is in charge now?
Well, I think a certain point comes in an administration in the second term where the goal is to get through the day. And I think part of the reason we're seeing the Justice Department problems is, a lot of good people have left the administration. And in any two-term presidential administration, they get tired. And a lot of times the best people join to begin with, and the people who are not at the very top end up filling more and more jobs as time goes on. I think you could certainly say that Kyle Sampson was somebody who should not have been chief of staff to the Attorney General. Certainly was qualified to be working at the Justice Department, just in a lower position. Same was true of Monica Goodling, and the same you could say is true of Alberto Gonzales himself.
Indeed. They're operating above their pay grades.
Yeah, I think that's just something that happens in second terms. So when you say, what is the Bush administration
I think that's something that happens to some extent in second terms. That's absolutely true. But I also think that this administration in particular has made a real art out of elevating mediocre people because of their political loyalty and nothing else. I mean, you're certainly right. The waning days of the Clinton administration, a lot of people were just tired and they wanted out of there, and so the people who were left were also tired and often weren't necessarily quite as good. Obviously with exceptions on both sides, but I don't think that I think that this administration really, really has brought back, the spoils system to a much higher degree. I mean, people always get rewarded for political loyalty, but usually there is some attention given to whether they're going to, really screw things up in important ways out of their incompetence. This administration has just never seemed interested in that. Filling up the critical positions in the CPA in Iraq with, extremely unqualified people whose sole claim to fame was that they were loyalists.
Well, I think that I wouldn't really buy the idea. As you can tell, I haven't been defending them, but I wouldn't buy the idea that they're worse than other administrations. I thought Janet Reno was a terrible Attorney General from the very beginning. You had a Democratic fundraiser who was a national security advisor, who later got in trouble with classified documents, Sandy Berger. I don't think administrations, especially in second terms, are often people staffed with stellar types. Now, one thing that's interesting going on in a kind of a semi-personnel way is there's been this strange resurgence or strange new respect for John Ashcroft, the former Attorney General, and it's just very bizarre. He was a guy who was shredding the Constitution and installing a theocracy, and now he seems to be praised as someone who is protecting our liberty, and I don't get that. Now, what do you make of this?
What I make of it is that, from my perspective, Ashcroft was a far-right fundamentalist religious extremist who had the principles to go with being a far-right fundamentalist Christian extremist. And what
do you mean? What are those principles?
Stuck to them. I mean, I I think here's what I see as the difference between Ashcroft and Gonzalez.
You mean
know,
principles
that
in a good way, right?
What?
You mean principles in a good way?
Yes,
okay.
yes, I do.
Okay.
I mean, I don't agree with 99% of what Ashcroft tried to do, but I think that he tried to do what he tried to do out of a coherent, if, in my view, totally mistaken, political philosophy, theological philosophy, if you will, whereas Gonzalez, I don't think Gonzalez has any kind of philosophy whatsoever. I think Gonzalez just does what he does for reasons of political expediency, and doesn't even do it very well for reasons of political expediency. You know, and if you had to pick one over the other, I would rather take the principled guy whose views are absolutely alien to me over the totally unprincipled hack who will do whatever seems convenient.
Now, we should explain, I guess, what all this is coming from is this story that James Comey testified to in the Senate, that, the NSA warrantless surveillance program had to be reauthorized every 45 days when it was in existence. Mm-hmm. And there came a time in 2004, was that what we're talking about? 2004.
2004.
Where it had to be reauthorized, and at the time it came up, it just so happened that John Ashcroft had suffered a terrible bout of, now I can't remember what
pancreatic.
It was
pancreatitis.
Pancreatitis, yeah. And so he's in the hospital, he's in great pain, and he's under sedation and everything. And Alberto Gonzalez and Andy Card, then the White House Chief of Staff, are going to dash over to the hospital room, get him to sign the extension of this. And James Comey said that a Justice Department review force had just completed a very long review of this program and felt that it needed substantial changes to comply with the law, and goes over there to intercept Gonzalez and keep Ashcroft from signing it. Now, it's kind of a funky story in the sense that Ashcroft had authorized and reauthorized the program several times leading up to then.
But you know what? One thing that we don't know, Byron, we still don't know exactly what program we're talking about.
Well, that's right.
We don't know exactly whether there had in fact been some change in what the administration
that was my next
was
point. We don't know if there was a change in it, or if the Justice Department simply took a long time with its review and they had just come to the conclusion that it had legal problems and thus shouldn't be reauthorized. But the deal is Ashcroft's kind of now this hero for standing up to this. Now, I personally think Ashcroft did a very good job as Attorney General. I think being Attorney General in the years after September 11th was one of the 2 or 3 hardest jobs on the planet, and I think he did it well. So I'm glad to see him getting some more respect. But I do find it odd that it's coming from people who, when it was useful to bash the Bush administration, they bash Ashcroft, and now that it's useful to bash the Bush administration, they praise Ashcroft. So, I question.
I don't think it's that contradictory, though. I mean, I don't think people are all of a sudden actually saying, John Ashcroft, what a guy, we love him, what a great job he did. I think that precisely people are saying even John Ashcroft could see that this was going too far, and even John Ashcroft was willing to just say, "Are you out of your mind?" at a certain point. That is what more that I see what's going on. That's precisely because Ashcroft is perceived by people on the left as so far to the right, as so extremist, that when even John Ashcroft from his hospital bed starts telling you, no, you're overreaching, boy, then you really know you've gone too far. And as I said, I think it's just, it's anybody respects people, anybody should respect people who are acting on principle even when they're wrong, more than we should respect people who just have no principles whatsoever. Which is something as I said, I don't get the sense that Gonzalez has any principles. That's for sure. It's unclear about the rest of the administration. Sorry?
Strange new respect, and more power to him. And I'm sure he's enjoying this. He has, by the way, has not made any public statement about this.
John Ashcroft.
I don't know. I would assume that the Congress is going to want to hear his side of the story. I'd want to hear Andy Card's side of the story too, and I'd be very interested to hear it. But they've been very, very quiet. I haven't seen any. I've tried myself, and I haven't seen them talking to anybody in the press about this. But the last thing we're stuck in this Justice Department thing. this whole Monica Goodling stuff that we discussed earlier. She goes and she testifies, and she's 33 years old, right? We should say
she's
that.
33 years old,
and she's treated kind of like a girl. And so the question is 33 a girl?
She's not only treated kind of like a girl, but she presents herself as a girl. And in fact, she says at one point, describing herself, she says, I may not have this quote exactly right, but she says something like, "I'm generally a very quiet kind of girl." She uses the term "girl" to describe herself, and it's so odd because my reaction, I had several reactions. One of which is, boy, could you see James Comey coming up and saying, "Well, I'm just a big overgrown boy," or Alberto Gonzalez saying, "I'm kind of a forgetful boy, so that's why I can't give you a straight story." Of course not. We can't conceive of any of these people coming up and announcing themselves as "I'm just a boy," with any description whatsoever. So it's a weird thing to say, and I'm sort of puzzling over it because it's not weird to me as a paranoid feminist type, right? It's not at all weird to me that a bunch of middle-aged guys in the hearings are going to treat her like a girl, even though she is a 33-year-old woman who has been exercising with ruthless effect the powers of a grown-up, right? That doesn't seem that weird to me, nor does it even seem weird to me that her handlers would have said, "Gee, Monica, you want to go up there and kind of be, do a little old me routine. You don't want to be cast as the villain here. You want to be cast as the nice young person doing your darndest. And oops, if you made a mistake, you're so sorry." But I actually accept that subjectively she does think of herself as a girl. And I find that deeply. I don't find that surprising because I teach law students, for instance, and most of them in their mid-20s through their late 20s and early 30s, they think of themselves as kids, most of them. Not all of them, but most of them. They wear their flip-flops and their baseball caps backwards on the boys, and they would describe themselves as boys and girls, and they refer to each other as boys and girls, as if they're in high school, rather than, young about to be professionals.
Listen, I do think we have this weird phenomenon where adolescence is now extended way into adulthood. Doesn't apply to the 18 and 19-year-olds who are fighting in Iraq and things like doing other very adult things that previous generations did. But, on the Monica thing, she definitely, I think it was very clever on her part. I don't know her personally. I've talked to her on the phone several times back when she was at the Justice Department in the press office. But, I think it was very, very useful to present herself that way because most of the male members of Congress who were on the committee treated her pretty well, and in particular John Conyers, the chairman, who was extremely polite in these hearings. I mean, he's very, very polite in these hearings. But what he usually does, if he's got Alberto Gonzalez in front of him, he starts out really, really polite. "Thank you so much. It's an honor." Blah blah blah. And then, ultimately he lights into somebody.
Right.
Well, he never did with Monica Goodling.
Don't you think that they a little bit learned their lesson from the other Monica when they were, rightly criticized as being hypocritical for, just trying to defend Bill Clinton by attacking Monica's reputation? And I wonder whether there isn't a little bit of a transference from Monica to Monica of, boy, we sure don't want to be the big mean guys who are mocking this young woman for sins that really were committed by the older man involved. Situations are obviously very, very different.
I was going to say, other than the fact that they're both named Monica, there's absolutely no comparison between why Monica Goodling was at the hearing and why Monica Lewinsky was appearing before investigators. So
I think that even literally the name similarity, people aren't necessarily thinking completely rationally about this, but I think that there is a little bit of an alarm bell that goes off in their minds thinking, Monica, didn't we get in trouble for, mocking Monica? Let's not mock Monica this time. So that may be a little piece of it in some weird subconscious way here.
Well, whatever it was, she got pretty good treatment from most of the members, not all of them. I thought Arthur Davis, the congressman from Alabama, did a good job asking questions. He
did a good job of very respectfully getting it out.
Just getting it out. Quickly and efficiently, and he didn't do his own sort of thing. Keith Ellison.
And he was one of the few people on either side of the aisle who showed any particular interest in doing something other than just posturing one way or the other.
That's right. Keith Ellison, the new congressman from Minnesota, basically told her he didn't care what her answers were. He just wanted to kind of take whacks at her. The weirdest one was Steve Cohen. He's the new Democratic representative from Tennessee. Took Harold Ford's old seat in Memphis. He's the guy who announced his intention. He's a very white fellow.
Caucus. Yeah.
He wanted to join the Congressional Black Caucus.
Yeah.
But anyway, he goes on about Regent Law School, Regent University Law School, which was where Monica Goodling went to school, founded by Pat Robertson. And, just kind of tried to kind of cast aspersions on her for that. And the one thing I think we saw is that she was pretty smart, and she was very, very composed. I was sitting, 6 or 8 feet from her.
Of course, being composed doesn't necessarily show that you're smart. Some people can be composed, too, because they don't know what questions they're going.
I thought she thought pretty well on her feet and answered, and she could have stumbled into things and didn't. So
she was good at not taking the bait. She didn't get trapped. Yeah.
Well, she didn't get trapped, and I'm sure there were members of Congress who wouldn't have minded that happening. So anyway, but to some extent, I think the girl thing did work for her and did help her. And I would be curious to see if she ever ends up in front of Patrick Leahy and Arlen Specter and all them, how they approach her as well.
Yeah, I think the girl thing so far is working out pretty well for her, and it may be that the girl thing is actually working out pretty well for the Democrats too, because their goal is not to eviscerate her. Their goal is to get her boss. And if they can enlist her to some extent in that, and they have to some extent, right? I mean, by giving her immunity, by getting her up there, she is continuing to dig Gonzalez's grave in terms of his reputation, even if he doesn't ever resign, which I sort of suspect he probably will. Eventually he's going to have to. It didn't cost them anything to go easy on her. I do worry more about. I worry more about what on earth is going on when we have a 33-year-old woman who I think also does think of herself as a girl. How do we...
Tell me, is that, they're like country songs, I'm not that kind of girl, that's kind of a popular usage, isn't it?
And grown
it's not really rare on her part, is it?
It's not really rare, but I think that the I'm not that kind of girl country song, first of all, a lot of the singers are in their 20s, but second of all, for a 40-year-old woman to talk about going out with her girlfriends or a girls' night out, that is sort of deliberately ironic to some extent. She wouldn't say, I'm just a girl, or I'm a quiet girl.
Okay, so it only has some punch because you're not, in fact, a girl.
Right. No, absolutely. Whereas I think Monica Goodling does think of herself as a girl.
Well, I don't know. We'll have to leave that one in the realm of mystery because I don't know how Monica Goodling actually views herself.
It wouldn't... The reason, and of course I don't know either, but the reason, as you say, it wouldn't surprise me is that I know so many young people who, of both genders, who think of themselves as kids, even though they're 28, 29, 30, 31.
That's true.
What are we going to do about that, Byron? Other than ship them all to Iraq.
Well, listen, that brings us to the end of our 5 chosen topics for today. And as I go off, I just want to say I enjoyed it, and I hope we can meet again sometime.
Likewise.
Okay.